Well, the dispute between management and students at Wits University over fee increases of 10.5%. The cost of higher education, there's been a lot of activity there at the university this week, closed for really close on 3 days in effect. The issue is who should be paying for these fee increases. And we've got 4 students from Wits with us here in the studio this evening. We've got Lesego, Fasiha, Thabo and Anele.
Yes.
Lesego, let's start with you. And it's been a hard week from the point of view of student organisation. Weeks of planning for this?
Definitely. I mean, you know, when you're rallying about student fees, you have to first report to the constituency and tell them what it is that's going on. And also ensuring that they understand what it means, what 10.5% means for them and all the things and how it's going to affect them. So it took a lot of time of planning from door to door to residences, calling onto community leaders as well as lecturers and various people within society to come and back us up on this one.
Fasiha, the big question that David asked right at the beginning, who do the students believe should be paying? We understand that there's a very strong voice that says this is an affordability issue. There are lots of students who just can't afford this. Who do you think should be footing the bill to afford higher education then?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to take note of is our demand to say that there should be no fee increments. So taking it from that, we understand that there is university subsidy from the government. That's a huge part. But really what we're saying is there needs to be greater conversation between university stakeholders and the government, particularly around the issues of subsidy. Because when you engage management, they're saying, look, we don't have money, government subsidy. You go to government, they're like, no, it's universities, you know. So we're feeling like there's not enough communication between the various stakeholders, especially not students. I mean, essentially, a lot of us were calling for free education in our lifetime. Free higher education as well. So that's really ultimately where we'd like to one day see ourselves.
But it sounds like, in a sense, you and the Vice-Chancellor of the university are on the same side. They're both saying, look, government's got to come to the party, government has cut the subsidy. There are 3 sources of university funding. There's the government subsidy, there's the fees, and then there's private money, foundations, sponsorships, donations, and that kind of thing. Thabo, how does it help to close the university, given what we've just said?
Closing the university, firstly, we must also look at what message we're trying to put across. By only saying that students must park outside and walk in, it's a matter of restricting access. In essence, we're saying that a lot of students who come from previously marginalized communities is the same thing. Everyone who applies to VET will not make it into VET, especially the certain things will be determining whether they make it or not. The effectiveness of the strategy we have employed in ensuring that our strategy going forward works, it was simply to make sure that we make people understand, because simply we must understand that SRC or student leaders necessarily, they represent everyone, people who afford, people who can't afford. It's for us to articulate and to explain to students who can afford to say that what we're doing necessarily is not necessarily to just hurt everyone. We want to ensure that access to education is not necessarily only for those who are privileged.
Anele, we've been following the story and we understand that the Vice-Chancellor was on the campus today. There are lots of images of him sitting right in the middle of all the students. Give us a sense of whether you're being heard. What is the Vice-Chancellor saying to you? What kind of promises is he able to make? Because ultimately, the Vice-Chancellor does not have the power to overturn the decision of the Council.
I think part of the struggle that we're trying to engage in here is decolonization, and that is challenging systems of power, challenging hierarchy, and challenging the ways in which we engage with power. So oftentimes students are boxed in by council, and you have one representative and 20 or whatever odd white beards that are speaking at you, and we're saying, actually, we're gonna change the hierarchy. Now you're gonna speak to students on their terms, and you're gonna sit on the floor because we're not heard. We have asked for more seats on council. We have asked for better representation, proportionate representation. You have 30,000 students, but you have more staff representation than students. So those are the kind of things we are engaged in. And in terms of asking the getting word from the Vice-Chancellor, I think at the moment, he's trying not to get himself into a corner because he knows that he has people that he has to answer to, which is why we have pushed him to say, well, get your entire council here. One of the demands that we've made today is that there must be a council sitting. He has said it's going to sit at 7 p.m. And we have asked to have access to that meeting because we don't want any secrets. We don't want to be reported to. And as it stands at Wits, you cannot get council minutes Those minutes are not released to the students. So that is part of the problem. So that it's this multi-layered, multilateral hierarchy that we're saying, no more, we want to know what's going on, and you must have this meeting now in front of us.
All of that makes sense. Fasiha, let's look at the closing of the university, the blocking it off, and there are a lot of individuals who were trapped. Certainly on Wednesday and Thursday, there were people who, once they were in, couldn't get out. Tests were cancelled, exams were cancelled, and so on. So doesn't there come a point where people's lives are affected?
So the first thing is that we didn't restrict access on foot, so anyone could come in or out on foot. And it was also very important and very symbolic that we closed the gates of the university, really to echo our call that should these fee increments actually happen, we're going to be closing the doors and the gates of higher learning to the poor. That's the first thing. The second thing is, yes, there was disruption, and yes, there was inconvenience, but what we're finding is that many students who are being affected by the issue are not really engaging well enough. So we know that they're affected by it, but they're not actually coming to the party, not coming a part of it. And what we wanted to do really is to make sure everyone is involved in the process. Everyone knew what was going on. So like I said, it wasn't something that we just thought of randomly. It wasn't just, oh, okay, now we're going to go to a disruption or protest. We've been in negotiations. We've been trying to come to some sort of an agreement with management. But management and the Wits University has not been negotiating in good faith. They did not provide documentation. We asked for projected financial statements. Those elements were not provided. In fact, when we did our own financial modeling and our own research, we've got a report on it, we found that the upfront fee payment does not need to increase the way they're saying it has to. And so what we're really saying is that there's a lot of thought that's gone into it. A lot of, I think people have misunderstood what we're trying to do. Really, it's about access to higher education. Yeah. Really, it's about showing people that we didn't just walk up. Let me jump in
only because we're running out of time, and let me play devil's advocate for a second. Lesego, there are voices out there that are saying, if you take a look at who is the voice behind these protests, and I think even tonight one could look at you guys and say you're the voice of a lot of these protests. They're saying you're privileged, you're at Wits University, you do not come from the poorest of the poor. In particular, when it comes to, for example, SASCO, the political dynamics underneath that, you find SASCO leaders and other leaders in a similar vein who have been at universities. They're in their 30s, and there's big questions about why are you still there? And so there's a lot of resistance to what you're trying to do as well. How do you deal with that?
I think, look, I mean, you know, for instance, if you take a SASCO, they say we're members of the community before we're students. So I think with this particular protest, what we've tried to do is to try set a stance for our campaign of free education. And part of the reason, part of saying that we want no fees, it is a beginning of a campaign to say there should be no fees on education, because ultimately, if you're charging students to come into university, we already pay back society by going back into the community. So society in its entirety benefits the most. So I think we try to manage it on that level. Yes, of course, we know that we're privileged, but we know that it's not enough. So we fight within the system with the advantage that we have, so that all gates can be opened.
Thabo, to come back to you for the last question, and we'd love to carry on with this. We haven't got too much time. You mentioned that people were not prevented from going in on foot, but the vehicles were stopped. Now, that raises lots of issues about where you park your car if you can't get into the university. But people in the university were not allowed out. So now it sounds to me, firstly, you've had dramatic impact. You've made a point. You've been on television. The issues have been aired. You've had an airing of the issues now. How long do you carry on obstructing people whose right it is to go to the institution, whether their fees are being paid by their parents or by the state or by the university? You're actually interfering with people's right to study and write exams.
I would like to not necessarily agree with you. Look, we've closed the university simply as we've described, that cars are not coming in. Firstly, it was to ensure that our voice gets out.
But you stopped them going out.
You can leave your car on campus and walk out.
Yeah, but how do you get home if you have no other?
Well, they have cars. They can get other means of transport, which I will not mention. But ours was to ensure that when traffic is blocked up, people called into radio stations and TVs, and they try to understand. We've been marching, by the way. We've been protesting to concourse, where we get there, we sing, we submit a memorandum. The following morning, a memorandum is being responded to. We're not necessarily sure if everything was being considered or it was a matter of just responding for the sake of it. We had to be creative. We had to be spontaneous in the way that we would protest this time. Unfortunately, it would be an inconvenience. If you're trying to change the system, there will be a bit of collateral, but in the greater scheme of things, what we're trying to do is to ensure that access to higher education is accessible to everyone.
I think the big question is, with this particular campaign, is it going to spill over into other universities? Is this the beginning of complete transformation in South Africa's universities? Could we see free higher education in our lifetime? Only time will tell, but certainly the young people at Wits University are trying to make a move in that particular space.